It started with a knock. Not just any knock. A pounding, deliberate 3-beat thud that rattled the glass of our front door. My wife, Sarah, froze at the kitchen counter, her hands still wet from the dishes. My son, Ethan, 15 and lanky, peeked down from the top of the stairs, curiosity fighting with unease. I glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Too late for salesmen. Too early for emergencies. And way too deliberate to be a neighbor. Another set of thuds shook the door. Inspection. HOA business. Open up! A voice barked from outside. Sarah's eyes widened. The HOA? At this hour? My gut told me something was off. I had dealt with our HOA president, Karen Lawson, plenty of times. She loved her rules, her fines, her power games. But midnight inspections? That wasn't her style. Still, I unlocked the door and cracked it open. That's when I saw them. 3 men in tactical vests and black caps, clipboards in hand, but with the kind of boots you don't buy at Home Depot. They weren't neighbors. They weren't inspectors. They looked like they belonged on a raid. "Sir," the tallest one said, flashing a laminated badge so quick I couldn't read it. "We're conducting an urgent inspection. Complaints of non-compliance." Behind him, a dark van idled at the curb, engine humming low. Something about the whole setup reeked. My years in federal service had honed instincts that didn't lie. These guys weren't HOA. They weren't even pretending very hard. "Not tonight," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You can schedule through official channels." The man's eyes hardened. Failure to comply will result in immediate fines and escalation. He tried to wedge his boot into the doorway. That was his mistake. In one motion, I slammed the door with my shoulder, twisting the lock as his boot bounced out. The chain rattled hard but held. Sarah gasped. Ethan's face went pale. Outside, the men muttered, low and angry. One of them spat on the porch. Then, as suddenly as they'd arrived, they retreated to the van. Tires squealed, red taillights vanishing into the night. Silence. Sarah's hands shook as she gripped my arm. What just happened? I stared at the empty street. That wasn't the HOA. That was something else. Morning light made the encounter feel unreal. But the chain on the door, bent slightly out of shape, told me it wasn't a dream. Dave, my old buddy from the Navy, stopped by when he heard. His frame filled the doorway, arms crossed, listening as I recounted every detail. "Fake inspectors," he muttered, shaking his head. "Karen's fingerprints are all over this. You remember how she harassed me over the RV? She'll use any trick to keep control." Sarah frowned. "But those men, they didn't look like regular thugs. They were organized." That was my thought too. And the question nagged at me, why? Why send men in the middle of the night to intimidate us? Ethan broke the silence. "Dad, maybe it's because of the drone." We turned to him. He swallowed, nervous. "I flew it last week. I was just recording for fun, over by the HOA office. But I think I saw something." He pulled up the footage on his laptop. At first it was just rooftops, cars, trees. Then the lens caught a black van pulling up to the HOA shed. 3 men unloaded heavy boxes, rushing them inside. One box had a faint logo, a contractor I recognized immediately. Government contractor. My pulse quickened. Sarah leaned closer. "You think they saw him recording?" I nodded. "And they came to erase the problem." By noon, we had detectives at the dining table. Miller and Evans, sharp, skeptical, but serious. They listened carefully, watching the drone footage twice, then a third time. Miller rubbed his chin. "That logo shouldn't be here. Those shipments are restricted. If Lawson's running cover for these guys, it's not just HOA abuse. It's federal." Sarah's voice trembled. "So those men last night, not inspectors," Miller confirmed, "hired muscle. Which means Lawson is way out of her depth. They asked Ethan to save copies of everything. Evans collected the damaged door chain as evidence. And just like that, our quiet suburban drama had escalated into something bigger. Karen Lawson didn't stay quiet long. The very next afternoon, Flyers appeared in every mailbox. Emails hit inboxes. She called an emergency HOA meeting. The language was sharp, calculated. Certain households have engaged in illegal surveillance activities, endangering the privacy and security of our community. The HOA will be taking swift action. She was flipping the narrative, turning us from victims into villains. Sarah read it aloud at the table, her knuckles white. She's trying to isolate us, to make us the enemy. Dave chuckled darkly. Classic. When the queen's cornered, she blames the peasants. But I knew what it really meant. She was desperate. By evening, the cul-de-sac was divided. Some neighbors came to our side quietly, dropping off coffee, offering security footage, even whispering encouragement. Others glared, muttered, or openly parroted Karen's lies. Felt less like a neighborhood and more like a battlefield. At one end, kids still played basketball, laughter echoing. At the other, grown adults argued about illegal drones and community security. The war lines were drawn. 3 nights later, a letter slid under our door. HOA letterhead. Karen's signature. It demanded Ethan's presence at a mandatory compliance hearing. Midnight, at the community center. Sarah read it aloud, her voice shaking with fury. She's trying to get him alone. I burned the letter in the sink. Not happening. What Karen didn't know was that detectives already had her in their sights. They had uncovered financial records, HOA dues funneled into shell accounts, payments tied to private security contractors. Karen wasn't just complicit. She was orchestrating it. The night the hearing was scheduled, our house was quiet but tense. Sarah sat bundled on the couch, Ethan upstairs pretending to play video games, Dave and Leo stationed at windows like sentries. At 11:30, SUVs crept into the cul-de-sac. Men in vests again. A dark van. The same 3-beat knock rattled the door. I opened it. Karen stood there herself, smug smile plastered across her face, flanked by her so-called inspectors. "Mr. Hale," she said smoothly, "failure to comply will result in severe consequences. Bring your son." But this time, she wasn't the only one with backup. From the shadows, Miller's voice cut sharp. "Karen Lawson, step back. You're under investigation for fraud, conspiracy, and aiding illegal transport of restricted materials." Red and blue lights burst across the street. Federal agents closed in from both ends. Karen's smile cracked. Her men froze, realizing they weren't hired for loyalty. They dropped weapons, some running, some tackled to the ground. And Karen, queen of the cul-de-sac, terror of the HOA, was dragged down her own driveway in cuffs, screaming about bylaws and conspiracies as cameras flashed. Her reign ended not with fear, but with the metallic snap of handcuffs. By dawn, news vans clogged the street. Reporters shouted questions. Neighbors peeked from curtains, some cheering, some ashamed. The detectives confirmed what we already knew. Karen had been covering up smuggling operations, using HOA authority as a front. My son's drone footage had cracked the case wide open. Miller shook my hand before leaving. "You should be proud. Your boy saved us weeks of work." I looked at Ethan, standing tall despite everything. Proud doesn't even cover it. That evening, for the first time in weeks, the house was calm. No knocks, no threats, just quiet. Sarah leaned against me on the porch. Ethan tinkered with his drone again, this time with a new GoPro strapped on. Dave and Leo toasted in the yard, laughter echoing through the night. The broken chain still hung on the doorframe, scarred and twisted. I left it there not as a reminder of fear but as a symbol, a marker of the night someone tried to break us, and failed. Karen had underestimated us. She had underestimated the law. And she had underestimated a family that refused to be bullied. In the end, that was her biggest mistake. Because this wasn't just about an HOA anymore. This was about justice. And justice knocked louder.